Hi everyone. Welcome to our Residence Life Training module on international students. My name is Krista Maston and I'm the International Student Advisor at Mount Allison. And joining me is
Aisha Matias Vega, and I'm the International Orientation Chair this year.
So Aisha is working with us in the International Center this summer in the lead up to International Orientation. And it's really great because Aisha was also the social chair of Thornton last year, and so she's coming to this with some really great insight and experience, having been an international student in her first year at Mount A, and then also serving as a residence leader, which is who you all are. So just an overview of what we're going to be discussing. So I'll be starting discussing the international student body at Mount Allison. So some of the kind of different groups of students that we have studying at Mount Allison. Then Aisha will be speaking to the international student experience, so everything from culture shock and like socializing and those types of things. I'll then cover some of the International Center programs and services, and then we'll end with kind of a reflection on what does your role as residence leaders look like when it comes to fostering cross-cultural understanding and inclusivity in residence. Mount Allison is approximately 10% international, and so as far as students here on a study permit, we're about 9% actually international students. But when you factor in students who have citizenship outside of Canada but maybe permanent residents of Canada, there's quite a big population of students in that category, and we actually jump to somewhere around 11% of the student body being international. And so this past year, we had 67 countries represented at Mount A. And so you can see the map there of all of the countries where we had representation. So I've grouped these into, to give you a sense of the different kind of pathways, or, like an international student at Mount A may kind of fall into one of these categories. So some of you may be familiar with the MASSE program. So MASSE stands for Mount Allison Semester Studies in English. And so we run MASSE programs 3 times a year. So we have a program running now over the summer. We have a program in the fall, and then there's a short term, I think it might be 12 weeks in the winter term, so a shorter term program, a group of students who come in the winter. And so these students are coming from a university in Japan, and so they are upper year students, typically third year university students. MASSE students do not take regular academic courses at Mount Allison. They are taking specialized EAL, or English as an Additional Language, classes. So we have teachers in the office that work through the International Center who are teaching these English classes. So as part of the MASSE program, there's lots of special activities and events that are organized. So they have conversation partner program, which some of you may be aware of and may have participated in. There are lots of trips that are organized. They have volunteering. So it's a full immersion program. And so the idea is that they're coming here for a cultural experience, but also to improve their English. And so they do that in the classroom, but they also do that through different activities. So that's the MASSE program. We also have students who will come on exchange. And so what this means is, Mount Allison has partnerships with a number of universities all across the world. And so our students from Mount Allison can go and study at these institutions, at these universities, for a term or a year. And in exchange, students from their institutions can also come and study at Mount Allison. So we have, between 15 and 20 students each term that are exchange students that come. They're also upper year students because typically, a student is completing a couple of years of study at their home institution before they come. So again, these are another short-term program, and upper year students essentially normally, because they are both MASSE students and exchange students are coming after completing a couple of years at their home institutions. And so our last group is our degree-seeking international students, and is normally kind of who we're referring to when we say international students. So we have between 60 and 70 new international students that start every year. So this past year we had about 200 on campus. So as degree-seeking students, these students need to apply for a study permit from their home country before they arrive. And so part of that is having, like a high level of English. They have to meet the academic requirements. They have to have, that is one difference between like the short-term studies and the degree-seeking students is that. So they are attending Mount Allison for their entire degree program. So these students are here for their entire 4 years.
Yes. So the international student experience is very similar to the Canadian experience. However, there are some challenges that might be intensified for an international student as we face a lot of other things. Mm-hmm. As a student leader, it is important to know about these challenges in order to be able to provide adequate help and support for the international students. It is important to note that the following information are generalizations that may not apply to every international student, as every individual is unique and their attitudes or feelings may not be attributable to the following challenges. Culture shock is a phenomenon that occurs to many people who are experiencing living in a new country. It describes the impact of moving from a familiar culture to an unfamiliar one, and it has several phases. Going into a new country, students will have to adjust to a lot of things, and some of the major aspects that international students have to adjust to when coming to Canada are the climate, food, language, values, etiquette and behavior, and socializing. Adjusting to climate is one of the biggest ones because many international students have never seen snow in their lives, for example. And while during the first time they come to Canada, you might notice that they are very excited the first time they experience snow. Once they start realizing that snow is not going to go for a long time, it may cause a hard time for them to adjust to it. And not having many hours of sunlight can also be very difficult to adjust. Food is also a very important part of a culture. I believe that food goes right into our hearts. Not in a literal way though. But it is important that being away from the types of foods you grew up with can be a real challenge. Imagine growing up in Canada and going on exchange for Mexico, for example. That's where I'm from. And where 70% of the food is spicy, like you would have a hard time to adjust to that. So that's what international students face when coming to Canada. The language is also very important, although English is not the first language it is the first language in many countries. For example, India or some other countries in Africa, it is not in others. So communicating in a different language may be overwhelming for international students since they could be struggling with pronunciation or vocabulary, like they might not be able to find the right word to express their feelings or emotions and won't be able to communicate as well. Accents and pronunciation are also something that international students may face and therefore may find overwhelming. So even if English is their first language, the pronunciation and accents in a new country might hinder their ability to communicate or understand the others. So values may vary among countries and what it is accepted, as well as the etiquette and behavior. And socializing adjusting to different norms, social norms, is also hard. So we're gonna talk about specifically socializing. For this part, I'm going to talk mostly about my personal experience, but I do know that this resonates with other international students. And there are particular social and cultural norms that international students have to adjust to, which can be a stress factor. For instance, different conversation topics, behaviors and beliefs, and interests and activities within a country. In Canada, when I first came here, I noticed how different are the conversation topics. I know that in Mexico, since it is more a conservative country, people are not as open to talk about sex or drugs. And then coming to Canada, it was a shock that people are so liberal in that way. It might not sound like a big deal, but coming to a new country where the interests, humor, and conversation topics are completely different can get stressful, as it is something else international students have to adjust on top of everything else. Mm-hmm. There are different behaviors and beliefs as well that are so normal within a culture that it is hard to notice there may be other cultures that have the same behaviors or different. For instance, in Mexico, when we greet someone, even if it's a person you see every day, or when we meet someone for the first time, we kiss each other and sometimes hug as well. And when I came to Canada, I did this and quickly learned that I should never do that again. There are also many taboo topics that we don't really are allowed to express our emotions on them, and it goes along with conversation topics, but it's other things that we believe that it's not right to talk. So an international student might come to Canada, and just hearing that can be very overwhelming. There are also differences in interests and activities. Many of our interests and activities, I find, are shaped by the simplest things that we grew up with, like the weather or whether we live in a city or not. So, for example, in Mexico, we are not really familiar with sports like hockey or snowboarding, snowshoeing, cross-country skiing, which can make it harder for international students to relate to this when talking about sports, for example, or when talking about weekend activities or what to do. And there are many other activities that are different in other parts of the world. When all of these factors add up, it can be extremely overwhelming for an international student, which can contribute to culture shock at the end. So cultural shock has many phases, and the most important ones are the honeymoon stage, and it occurs at the beginning. The individual may be feeling extremely happy and in love with the new culture because everything is new, interesting, and exciting. And then later on, they move to the irritability and hostility stage, where differences become more apparent and irritating, and international students feel that all of the differences that they noticed are actually bad and start with these negative feelings and emotions towards Canada. These negative feelings may cause that simple aspects of everyday life seem overwhelming, and many times the students in this stage regret their decision of coming to a new country to study and really long to go back home. This stage can be difficult to perceive, as many university students can feel negative emotions towards their degree, residence, or school. But keep in mind that for an international student, small things like losing their ID card or not being able to see a doctor whenever they want to, since some countries have private doctors and it's something really normal in those countries, or not having easy access to transportation, for example, taking an Uber to the mall or things like that, may add up and trigger frustration. And while frustration comes and goes, it's a natural reaction for people spending extended time in a new country. The last stage is adjustment and adaptation. And as international students continue their lives in a new culture, they begin to develop a more balanced and objective view of their experience. They become more familiar and more comfortable. And then life and navigation in Canada becomes easier for them. So the good thing is that culture shock has actually benefits for both the students, the international students, and you guys, the residence leaders, and those who get the chance to communicate with the international students. Research shows that there are incredible personal benefits, and so although adjusting to a new culture may be challenging for some international students, it is important to not lose track of the amazing opportunity for growth that is inherent in this challenge. Some of the most reported benefits of studying abroad are exposed to distinct cultural perspectives. If you immerse yourself in a diverse environment, you will have the chance to test your beliefs about a certain culture. You're also able to make lifelong friends, and you get the opportunity to make friends from different backgrounds. I personally really like having friends in other parts of the world because then I can visit them without having to pay or stay.
One of the perks.
Yeah. And then personal development or personal maturity. The international students will eventually grow from their experiences that they lived on exchange or during their degree. And it is also a life experience, since this could be the first opportunity for many exchange students and international students to go abroad for such a long period of time and discover the world. So it is something they will definitely never forget. And it is also an opportunity to develop compassion. Is a way for a better understanding of their own cultural values and biases. And now we have the strategies for coping for an international student. So they have to understand that it is a normal experience and it may be helpful in itself. It would be good if they could get comforts from home, so keep in touch with their families and friends, or just cook something from home, eat some snacks, ask their family to send them some packages, some parcels once in a while, and just get involved in school with clubs and societies. Take time to explore and enjoy this place they're in, since it's for a limited time a lot of the times, and take advantage of the student services, for example the international center or counselors, and yeah. So there's also extra pressures in academic adjustment, since, for example, attendance is different among countries. There are some countries like China, for example, where attendance is not mandatory and students can just leave and not be back until the final exam, and they will be fine and still get an A. But in here it is different, so they might have a hard time adjusting to that, since they have been used to their way for their whole life. Participation is also different among cultures. Some countries don't really need much participation during the semester, and once they come here and they realize that they got a bad mark because they didn't participate enough, that can be sad. Individual and group work.
So with this, I guess just there can be different norms and different academic systems around group work. And so, I think the most common example I can think of with this, in some academic systems, it would be a foreign concept to do an assignment together, to work together and come up with a project, the idea of trying to share the load and everyone getting one grade based on a group work assignment versus maybe in those systems it would be more common for each individual to have to do their own assignments. And so, the value that we put in group work and working together, that can be a difference depending on what academic system a student is coming from.
Yes. And then citing and paper writing, a lot of universities, and for example in Mexico, some of them are not as tough on citing properly. And so you can just put a Wikipedia link at the end of your essay and you'll be fine. But coming to Canada, you actually have to put the page numbers and you have to be very specific. So that can also be an extra burden. Mm-hmm. There is also a lot of parental pressure, and with some international students, the tuition is very expensive. And sometimes the currencies are lower in different countries. So parents might be very hard and tough on their children, under children. And so if you see an international student who's very stressed, just consider this as well. Immigration might also be a challenge, since students may want to
I think the immigration consideration maybe under academic is academics can be difficult for any student, right? It's not just an international student experience, but an added component for international students is that they are in Canada on a study permit, and with that means certain regulations. So for example, if they want to be able to work part-time, they have to have full-time course load. Mm-hmm. So if they're having a mental health issue, or if they're just doing really poorly and they're thinking that it's best for them to drop down to part-time studies, those types of options aren't available to them because they have to think about the impact on their immigration. So it's just one more factor that a student will have to think about. And then in long term, so immigration concerns around, okay, so I'm finishing up my degree, I'd like to be able to stay in Canada. So, another thing that, that students on top of everything else, could be dealing with.
That's true. Yeah. Also, there's financial ones, since, as I mentioned before, tuition is double or a bit more than twice as much as Canadian tuition. So they want to make their money worth, and maybe just focus a lot on their academics, but also it can be very stressful for them if they just focus on academics and don't try to socialize.
Okay.
So there are many assumptions that we can make, that we all have them, but just be aware that we all have them and just try not to make them.
In this section we're talking generally about the international student experience, and I think we just want to really highlight a caution around making assumptions based on based on a student being an international student. So for example, there are lots of international students that come to Canada from an international school background. So an international school background meaning maybe they studied in Mexico, but they were at a school where it was a Canadian curriculum being delivered. The language of instruction was in English. And so coming into it with an assumption that just because a student is an international student, they must be dealing with all of these challenges. So we caution around making assumptions just based on someone being an international student, because again, these experiences like the culture shock and the academic adjustment and the social adjustment, those are all, they may be factors, but everyone is an individual and everyone will have different experiences with that. So with culture shock, when you talk to international students about culture shock, you will find a wide variety of experiences with culture shock. A lot of students will say, I didn't experience culture shock at all. And maybe that's just like reflecting back. Again, first term, first year is a tough time for everyone. So to be able to say like, oh yeah, that was culture shock versus just like, that was challenging because of, everything else that was happening. So again, just caution around those, the things that Aisha was chatting about is kind of like their, general themes to think of, and it's good to be aware of, but also everyone as an individual, and everyone has individual experiences and backgrounds. And so, yeah, just a caution around taking that advice as, speaking to every international student's experience, because everyone is an individual and everyone will have unique experiences. Mm-hmm. Does that sound fair?
Yes.
Okay, so the next section I'm going to talk a bit about the International Center and the support services that we provide here. So in the office, we have myself, so I'm responsible for international student services and programs, and then Robin Walker is the Massey program coordinator, and she also coordinates study abroad and exchange. So if you're interested in going on exchange during your time at Mount A, she would be the one that you would be working with, and she also works closely with exchange students. So some of the services and programs that I coordinate as international student advisor, take you through each of them briefly. So international orientation is kind of a pre-arrival, pre-orientation that is run before general university orientation begins. And so it's a really amazing time. It's often a highlight, of a student's first year, like when they reflect back on international orientation. Part of that is because we have an amazing, I would say a large part of that is an amazing group of upper year international and Canadian student volunteers who lead a lot of the discussions and plan the events and lead the events. So again, Aisha is our international orientation chair this year, and she has a team of 15 volunteers that will come back early and lead international orientation. So the idea is that students get to arrive early on campus, get settled. A lot of students will be dealing with jet lag, but just gives them a chance to get settled on campus before the big move-in day when everyone arrives. And then also during this time, we do a lot of international student specific or focused programming. So, we'll have discussion groups around culture shock and what that's like and how, strategies for coping. We'll help students apply for their health insurance and their New Brunswick Medicare. We'll talk about work authorizations with study permits. So all of those things that are, wrapped up in the international student experience, we kind of, take that time to do that programming. Again, there's lots of social activities. We take them to the beach to do a bonfire. We take them to the mall to go and do some shopping. So it's a lot of fun. But yeah, that is one of the services that we provide for students. We also have both the Mentorship Program and also the Massey Conversation Partner Program. Both have very similar frameworks and goals. The Mentorship Program is for international students, so degree-seeking students and exchange students. The Conversation Partner Program is for Massey students. And again, the focus more on, there is the social component, but there's also like the learning language component with Massey students. With mentorship, it's more, there is a mentorship component, but more often it's friendship. It's like, so it's matching first-year students, international students with upper-year international students and Canadian students. They'll meet, once a week or once every 2 weeks. We encourage students, the mentors, just to, just include their mentee in what they're doing. So if they're going to a coffee shop, invite them along. If they're going hiking with a friend, invite them along. It's mentorship, it's companionship, but it's also just like a resource person that is there for them. We also organize trips as part of the mentorship program, which is a big perk for students. So we'll take students to PEI, to Halifax. We'll organize events. The majority of first year students participate in mentorship programs. So it's also just a really great community. It's a way to stay connected with that international student community that was formed during international orientation. It's a really great program, and it's something that, someone in your house is not involved and you feel like they could benefit from making more connections, the mentorship program is a great recommendation for those students. We also have some academic support services. So in the International Center, we organize the academic support program. So in the winter term, if students have done poorly in their fall term and struggled, we offer a program where students meet one-on-one with an academic counselor. We have free tutoring as part of that. Yeah, and like just help with academic skills, workshops, and things like that. We also have a couple of professional EAL writing tutors in the Writing Resource Center. So the Writing Resource Center normally is staffed by student staff, so like upper year students. But our EAL tutors are actually like professors. Like one of them is an English professor, and the other is one of our Massey teachers who has like 20 years experience EAL teaching. And so that is a really great service and something that students who do use that service usually speak very highly of. So, we talked about some of the differences in writing norms and citing and what have you. And so a writing tutor option is really great because it's a chance for students to improve their writing and, help them with their assignments. We also, for first year students, provide final exam accommodation. So if a student's first language is not English, and they have not studied previously in English, then they're eligible to apply for extra time for their final exams through our office. So tax services, immigration, health insurance, so all of those things, kind of the logistical things that international students or, when you're living in a new country, you have to think about, health insurance, taxes, study permits, visas, and that type of thing. We coordinate all those services through the International Center, so by all means, refer students to us if they have those questions. We also do programming and trips throughout the year. So we have International Education Week in November. We invite international students during that week as part of our World Bazaar. It's an annual event. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's usually held downtown in the United Church, but students will make dishes from their home and sell them in kind of a food fair style. People from the town come out and also students, so you should definitely check that out if you haven't already. This happens in November. So International Development Week happens in the fall term. International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination happens in March. So we're bringing in speakers. We are, organizing events during these things to kind of highlight these international themed events. And again, so the trip last year, we organized a trip through Nova Scotia, hiking, and so on for Thanksgiving weekend. Thanksgiving weekend can sometimes be like a challenge because it's for international students, just from anecdotal experience. So residences can kind of clear out during that weekend. Everyone's really excited to go home and see their family, and then international students are like, that's just when they're really feeling homesick, and then like they see all of their friends like leaving and seeing their family, and it's like can really hit the heart. And so we usually try to organize something that weekend. And so last year we had organized a hiking trip, and they're not free, so students have to pay for them. So not everyone will sign up, but it is, there are opportunities to explore the region through the mentorship program as well. As I mentioned, we organize different trips. Last year during Reading Week, we organized a Niagara Falls trip. So again, for a price, and it was, it's an expensive trip to go on, so it's not an option for everyone, but it is a really great opportunity. And one of the strategies for dealing with culture shock that Aisha mentioned was getting out there and exploring the region. Like you can get kind of, especially in a place like Sackville, which can be quite isolated from other places, you can kind of like students can become more isolated and maybe withdrawn easily. But if you can get out there and remember, this is an exciting experience to be in a new place. And so taking those opportunities to go on the International Center trips, or just to go out and enjoy get out and find a new place that you haven't been or whatever, it kind of brings some of that excitement back to being in a new place. Because again, it can be super challenging to be in a place that is so different from your home. Also to be aware of that there's lots of international student groups on campus, like clubs and societies that run and that students can engage with. It's really important to encourage students to go to the Clubs and Activities Fair, which I'm sure you are all aware of, but these groups would be represented there, and it's really a great chance for students to see what's out there that can align with their interests. So Mosaic is the Multicultural Student Association. The Chinese Students Association also is an active group on campus. They organize events throughout the year, but their most prominent one is for Chinese New Year in the winter term. There's a Black Students Union, which is very active. They do a lot of like advocacy and awareness and education pieces. They're active on Facebook, so you could join them and see what they're up to. The Student Union has a couple of positions that are kind of centered around international student advocacy and support. So this coming year, there's going to be a new international student counselor position on the Student Union. There's also a MASU international student affairs position, which is like a staff position. But anyways, just to be aware that those do exist and that it's another support or, avenue for students to be heard and to connect. And finally, there's the Islander Society. So this is a society that became active a couple of years ago, maybe even just last year. So students from the Caribbean, so they organize events. They also just, have weekly meetings where students get together. I've heard from first year students who joined the society and said that it was a really great support because, it's just a chance to connect with students who have been through a similar experience, and it's a connection with home, and so those are helpful. Aisha may also be involved in another student group, so stay tuned for more details. But this is really, every year the student groups who are active change. Like, we used to have a Korean student society on campus because we had a couple of really active students, but they're not active anymore, so it changes every year. But yeah, the Clubs and Societies Fair is the best way to see what's going on because Aisha just told me she's learning so much about the International Center. Okay, so so that was a bit of an overview of the services that we provide. We were going to end the presentations with a bit about what can you do. So hopefully, as we've gone through this, you can kind of reflect on how you see yourself as an RA, as an executive member, as an academic mentor, on how you can support and include international students in residence and on campus. But we wanted to add a bit just with some kind of top tips on what you can do to help. Yeah. So Aisha's going to take this part.
So you can be inclusive, and by this we mean you can recognize the current social situations that are impacting minority groups and be aware of those and just act on the events you make, for example, to make sure that you don't only celebrate Christmas, for example, and you include more cultures. You make sure you initiate the conversation. Now that you know this, if an international student is not as social as others, keep in mind all of the information we gave you about the factors that might be causing this, their behavior. Or just like every other human, it's just not a good day, but you as a student leader should make the first step and initiate the conversation. Avoid making assumptions. So ask and don't assume. If someone is international, don't resort to stereotypes about their country, or don't think that because they might be having a bad day, it must be due to the cultural shock. Or they might just be depressed or something. Just ask and make sure to engage. Be aware of cultural insensitivities or misunderstandings. So there are a lot of phrases or questions that international students get, and I know Krista has received a couple of them from a lot of international students, so it's very common. For example, where are you actually from is one of the questions that students get, and I get it because I am from Mexico, but I don't really look Mexican. So, for example, receiving this question again and again can imply that the person isn't really from the nationality they say they are, and or doesn't belong there just because of their appearance. And what is wrong with this question is that it presupposes that being a person of color or being different is inconsistent with being from that specific country.
Another example of this, so I had mentioned that we have a large student population of permanent residents of Canada, right? So, these students may have been born and raised in Canada, and so maybe they are a person of color, or maybe they present as, like whatever, but when the comments are made like, where are you from, and then if the answer is Canada, and then like, oh, where are you actually from, or where are your parents from, or those comments make the assumption that because of an appearance or because of an accent that they are not really from. So just being aware that that is offensive, and it's a common question, and again, not even just the question, but it's the assumptions behind it and how the question is asked that can be offensive.
Yeah, so just what you could do instead is, like, it is okay to ask where someone is from, but just don't, like, go along with your assumptions and continue to question that. And then also if the person in question, like, wants to discuss their identity, once you already asked where they are from, they can bring it up at their own discretion. There is also another one, a very common one, and it is, your English is so good. You may think it is a compliment, but it's not, because by saying this, you may make the other person feel like an outsider, and you don't know how long the person has been speaking English for as well, so it's just an assumption. So what you can do instead is, like, nothing, like, don't say it. Like, if you want to know if English is their native language, you can just ask. Don't assume that because they are foreign looking or they have an accent, English is not their first language.
Yeah, so another one we had kind of brainstormed around was like you're telling students like, oh, your name is so hard to pronounce, or like really concentrating on that. I think a name is so close to one's identity, and what I would recommend is that you try your best to learn how to pronounce students' names and steer away from making comments about how hard a name is to pronounce. So yeah, one of the suggestions Aisha was thinking is like, if you can't pronounce a student's names, just ask them how to say it and then do your best to learn. So don't make the comment of like, your name is really hard to pronounce, but just, you ask a student how to pronounce their name, you work your best to do it and try your best. Again, you're like reminding someone that they are different, right? Like, I feel like that's hurtful. And again, it often doesn't come from a mean place, but it's just one of those, it's a way that you can be more, culturally sensitive. And
aware, And then also you can inform the students of the services available at the International Center, because as you saw, I had no idea of some of them. And they have so many resources available for international students that lots of them are free, and some of the others have a cost, but like they are good ones and they're worth paying for.
So I hope that that was informative. If you have any questions at all, I would invite you to come by and see us in the International Center. Thanks for all of your hard work that I know will come in the coming year. Aisha can speak to it because she was there last year in a role in residence, but I know how important your roles are. I was a Don actually of Windsor a number of years ago, but I had that, I had that experience of working with residence leaders, and I really appreciate what you guys do, and you guys have a huge impact on students' experiences. So thanks for all your work.
Thank you. Good luck.
Bye.